Hey everyone, Nick here. Today I'm going to be making a push dagger out of an old file, and I'm going to be using some of the techniques from my new book, Simple Knife Making. I'm starting out with an old 10-inch Nicholson file, and I've gone ahead and marked 4 inches from the base of the file. I'm going to be using part of the tang of the file so it'll fit to this antler handle. Now I take my angle grinder with a cutoff wheel, cut off the tang, and then cut off the rest of the file. So now that I've got my file cut down to size, it's time to build a small forge and start annealing. The forge is made of 10 red clay bricks, and the air supply pipe is a 1-inch steel pipe with 1/4-inch holes in it. I'm using a heat gun for the air supply, though you could also use a hairdryer. To light the forge, I place a crumpled piece of paper into the middle of the charcoal. Now the charcoal I'm using is lump charcoal, which is different than charcoal briquettes. I then light the piece of paper and wait for the flame to catch. Once it catches, I turn on the forge and cover it up with charcoal. After a while, the fire builds up and it's ready to use. Now that the fire is stable, I take my file and I put it in tang first. I cover it with coals and I leave it in there until it glows a bright red. I turn off the forge, cover it back up, and then I let it burn down on its own. Once the file is completely cool to the touch, it's annealed and ready to go. So now I take it to my angle grinder and I start cutting it down to shape. This dagger has a 3-inch blade, and the section where the fingers will go is 1 inch long. So to cut the curve in the finger grip area, I start by cutting a series of slits. Then I come back at an angle and cut off each of the slits, which is a lot easier than trying to cut a curve straight in with the rigid disc. Once everything's cut out, I switch to the grinding wheel and start grinding everything to shape. I make sure that the finger areas are nice and smooth, and then I refine the shape of the tip. Then I go with a half-round file and start rounding out the finger grip areas. I want them to be nice and rounded with no sharp edges so that when you're gripping the dagger, it doesn't dig into your fingers. Once I've filed all 4 sides, I take a piece of PVC pipe, cut a slit down the whole length, and then slide a piece of paper in. This way I have a sanding block that is easily interchanged between different grits. I work my way to a 220 grit and make sure to smooth everything out. Once it's smooth and I'm happy with it, it's time to start working on the bevels of the knife. With a piece of soapstone, I mark out the plunge and grind lines, and I also scribe a line along the edge of the knife so I know where the center is. I use the grinding wheel to first grind down to the center line on the edge, and then I grind to my bevel line. Once I'm happy with that side, I switch over to the other side until not only do I have them centered along the edge, but I also have them meet in the middle. Once I've ground all 4 bevels, I switch to a flap sanding wheel and smooth everything out and flatten it to prepare for hand sanding. So for hand sanding, I'm using a wooden stick with rounded edges and just wrapping my sandpaper around it. I start by sanding perpendicular to the blade to remove any irregularities and grinding marks. Once all the grinding marks are gone, I switch to a higher grit and start sanding front to back. I keep going up the grits, finishing at a 500 grit sandpaper. And each time I go up, I make sure that I've taken out all the scratches from the previous grit. Once all the low grit scratches are out, I use a metal scouring pad to lightly brush in a satin finish. Now it's ready for heat treat. I fire up the forge again and then place the knife into the coals. I pass it through the coals until it no longer sticks to a magnet, and then dunk it into a container of canola oil. I make sure to move the knife up and down, not taking it out of the oil, until it's completely cool. And with the scouring pad, I clean off all of the scale on the blade so that I can watch the tempering colors. Now to temper a dagger like this, I've heated up a piece of rebar, and I'm holding the blade on the rebar until the tempering colors come through. And I hold it there until the edges get a nice straw color. Then I clean off the tempering oxide with a piece of 500 grit sandpaper. And here it is. So now I'm going to start drilling out this 3-inch piece of elk antler. I start by drilling an 1/8 inch hole through the handle, which is a little bit thinner than the thickness of the blade. Once I've drilled all the way through, I use the cutting edges of the bit just to widen the hole slightly, just enough so I can fit an 1/8 inch file in there. Once I get the file in, I use it to widen the slot enough so that the blade will fit. I use a flap sanding wheel to grind the handle down to the shape I want. I'm going for a nice rounded shape that'll fit well in the palm. And here's the handle after grinding. Now to finish it up, I'm going to be cutting 2 spacers out of brass, and these are going to go on either side of the handle to protect it. I start by drilling out a series of holes. Once the holes are drilled, I use a needle file to connect the holes and then smooth them out so that I get a nice fit. As you're filing the slots, it's important to make sure that the pieces fit snugly without gaps on any of the sides. Once the spacers are fitted, I use a flap wheel on my angle grinder to grind them down to shape. And here they are, fitted onto the knife. So I've gone ahead and cleaned them up with a Scotch-Brite pad just to give them a nice satin shine. And here's the handle all fitted up. Now I'm going to cut down the back of the tang so that only about a 1/16 of an inch sticks out. Then I take the blade, clamp it to the edge of my table so it won't move. I then mix up some slow curing epoxy and smear it onto the tang of the knife. I also put some on the inside of the handle, then put the handle in place, put the back spacer on, and then with a ball peen hammer, I start gently pounding over the back of the tang. I keep hammering the back of the tang so that it mushrooms over and locks the handle into place. Then I use rubbing alcohol to clean off any of the excess epoxy before it's had a chance to cure. If it's already cured, you can use a razor blade to gently scrape it off. And here's the dagger all finished up. I made this for my wife. She really likes push daggers, and I wanted to make her something that was based off of the old Sheffield gambler's daggers. So here it is. I hope you enjoyed building this dagger with me today. If you like this video, be sure to check out my channel for other videos like this. And I've also written several books on different topics, including this one on knife making. So as always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.